Gavin from ChangePlan here. Look, AI adoption is on the mind of so many of us of late. Of course, it'll be us change managers who will be on the front lines of the implementation of these tools. So to get a better sense of what's happening, I am delighted to introduce James Gauci, who is the CEO and founder of Ethē, a platform that helps organizations establish AI governance. And he has a bunch of other roles, but prominently serves as the chair of the Australian National Committee of the Society on Social Implications of Technology. And to kick off, I'd like to discuss the inevitability of AI disruption. Our view is that competitive pressure will force organizations to adopt AI. How do you think about the inevitability of AI adoption?
I think the main challenge is that demand for AI is, for the first time, overwhelmingly bottom up. And the benefits are really clear to a lot of people, especially working in information industries, where the benefits of summarizing content, generating new content quickly, and for the most part pretty effectively, it just drives that demand unequivocally. And the reality is that whether or not leaders and executives like it, it's going to happen. It's the new shiny toy that everybody has a free copy of. And in a situation like this, ignorance isn't really a strategy, especially when it comes to accountability and organizational risk associated with the use or misuse or accidental unintended consequences of using AI.
Would it be fair to say that there'll be a second wave where it's likely that leaders are going to see a lot more benefit in reducing employee count and automating processes with that second or next generation of AI tooling?
There's going to be some significant tension in human resourcing of particular roles. There are kind of two main schools of thought here. One is, we're going to use generative AI to augment our existing workforce. And the other school of thought is, well, yes, if you don't adopt AI tools, then competitive pressure is going to force you out of the workforce.
There's that old fable about King Canute, who was incensed when he decreed that the tide not come in, but it came in anyway. My sense is that if governments can't even stop things like Uber or Airbnb from operating in their countries, how could they possibly expect to legislate around AI?
That's a really great point. To the delight of some listeners, no doubt, and to the chagrin of many others, governments are moving incredibly quickly on this topic, and they've had a long time to prepare. Something that I don't think a lot of people realize is that the idea of having standards and frameworks and responsible ways of working and the idea of safety around autonomous and intelligent systems, these concepts have been around for a long time.
We've certainly seen anecdotally that a lot of people are using AI tools on their own personal machines or on their phones to help them with their work. I'm wondering if that's not going to continue and in fact dramatically increase as a kind of behavior.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and that point kind of speaks to accountability. And something that's interesting in the EU AI Act is that there aren't really any personal requirements. There are no requirements of individuals specifically in their day-to-day life. It's expected that, like any technology, that you don't commit any crimes using the tools that you have available to you. Like I can still commit assault with a phone, just bop someone over the head with it. You've
written that company directors are dangerously unequipped when it comes to considering AI risk. My concern is that it's not just directors in this predicament. We change managers will be tasked with thinking through the change risks around AI implementation, and the risks that we used to consider when it came time for a CRM implementation or an ERP implementation would be cost overruns, user resistance, service disruptions, are not these kinds, and the risks weren't that, the system will start to self-improve and gain sentience and the singularity will be reached and become uncontrollable. Now I realize I'm being histrionic here and silly, but how should we be thinking about these risks?
This idea of risk management, and risk management is generally an inward focusing exercise. How is this system or the uses of this system potentially going to impact, if risk scenarios are realized, what's the likelihood and impact of those risk scenarios? And so that's an inward focused, how's it going to impact our organization kind of function.
So that's all sort of change management bread and butter, is the impact assessment on all of the stakeholders, not just the users of the system.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I start to talk about these things, it depends on the discipline of the people that I'm speaking to, because on the technology side, 9 times out of 10, they're like, what's an impact assessment? But when it comes to design, for example, or change management and risk management, they're always thinking in terms of impact, in terms of benefits and potential harms to the individuals and groups and societies that might be affected by a system. So yeah, that's a great example of the change management community probably being a little bit better equipped than the technologists that they are working with to assist with these kinds of processes.
What do you think are the unique risks that we change managers need to think about? Because we're used to thinking about things like resistance or sponsors not getting involved to a sufficient degree. How should we be thinking about AI?
I think there are certainly 4 main risk and impact categories, and they are accountability, privacy, transparency, and algorithmic bias. So accountability is who in the organization does it fall to be responsible for the ongoing management, continuous improvement, and failure of an AI system, and what kind of governance controls in place for effectively managing that. Then in privacy and transparency, they're a classic kind of ethical pairing, because the more you care about privacy, the more you're often eroding transparency. And so making decisions that champion privacy, like making sure the personally identifiable information doesn't go into a model, for example, versus transparency of saying, well, we want to know exactly how this model is working and all of the data that's gone into it. There are certainly some system design trade-offs there, but also some business process design elements to that as well, as you would expect. And then there's the classic one that gets probably the most headlines, which is algorithmic bias. It might seem a little bit trite to say, but every learning system is based on probabilities and is therefore built on bias. And so the challenge of systems designers and developers and governors is to ensure that the bias isn't unwanted.
I'm surprised there isn't as much focus on intellectual property.
Well, that's an interesting point. I think privacy is an area that you could feasibly apply to intellectual property, but ethical concepts like agency and autonomy and ownership over the products of your work and the right to economic empowerment, all of those things factor in and into probably a broader ethical framework that you might want to elicit for your organization. And something that colleagues and myself have been talking about recently is this idea that organizational values have never been this important before, because not only are we expecting that we have those values and we carry out those values consistently, but we're now expecting these autonomous systems to do the same on our behalf, and sometimes with legal accountabilities and liability and so on.
Ultimately, an organization, or particularly a company in a capitalist environment, exists to create shareholder environment. Shouldn't it be government who is actually putting into place these are the required values?
That's a great point, and a lot of people in business would probably disagree that the government should, overlay their values onto an organizational context, especially in light of fiduciary responsibility and things like that. There are no easy solutions here. We're on this journey together, and that's part of what certainly makes me excited about where we're at as a society in grappling with the technology.
I'm imagining a world that's not so far away where we have AI agents that are both embodied, so robots, machines, and also virtual AI agents, and they're going to be commonplace. It'll just be everywhere. You have AI taking on increasing levels of decision making, and that comes back to your idea of contestability and agency. From a perspective of change management, we're going to see concepts like we currently have, where you've got business as usual within an organization and you've got projects and portfolios, one-off tasks. That's going to become outmoded. It's just going to become sort of a blend of work, and there'll be constant things changing, and the management of those changes will be the same as the management of ongoing processes. in that world, which I don't think is particularly far away, it's certainly not more in my mind than 5 years away, 6 years away. In that world, humans are going to very quickly become the weak point in terms of the ability to shift and to adapt and to innovate. So it's the wetware that's the problem, or the wetware that is the weak point. At a certain point, from a change management perspective, the change manager's role is kind of nursing people through shifts that are happening. I'd love to hear your reflections on all of those pieces.
That may be the biggest question that I've ever been asked. So thank you for that. Full disclosure, 5 years ago, I was right there with you. I was looking at this future of automated decision making and seeing what had happened over the last 15 years with social media, which uses algorithms to determine something as simple as what content you're going to see, with something as simple as the fiduciary responsibility to shareholders to maximize profits from ads, right? Now we have humans struggling to keep up with that, let alone with all of those other more advanced and complex implementations of decision-making systems that you mentioned. These are real and clear and present challenges to all of us in every role across the planet. I mean, the Australian Productivity Commission came out and said that 60% of Australian jobs are going to be impacted by AI in one way or another. So there's no question of the potential for impact on individuals and organizations.
As I'm working day to day, what are the kinds of things I should be doing when I'm working on an AI adoption? What are the behaviors that I should be engaging in, or how should I be thinking? I know you've been talking about values a lot, but specifically, what should I be doing on the ground differently that I may be doing at the moment?
What I genuinely believe is that individuals operating in any role should have an understanding of how their own values interact with the values of the organization that they represent or they're working in or they're consulting to. It's where you start to make those values trade-offs or those ethical trade-offs that will inform your next best action, whether that's to escalate an issue or whether that's to accept an issue and move on. It's really down to the discretion of the individual.
I think it's super interesting because it places a lot of agency on each of us to have to really grapple with these issues. And it's kind of exciting in one sense, because it's a responsibility and something that we can all engage with. It's also scary in another sense because there's not going to be consistency and harmony in terms of how that's done. Some people will have more capability of doing that thoughtfully than others. And there will always be free riders and people who want to just take advantage of the fact that they can get certain efficiencies by just ignoring that stuff.
It's fair to say, and I find myself saying this relatively frequently at the moment, that fear is an appropriate response to the level of volatility and uncertainty that we're facing with technology, exponential technologies like AI. And it's just a question of what you then do with it. And in organizations, that's the function of governance. It's to say, okay, we see uncertainty, we see risk, and we quantify it and qualify it as best we possibly can. And then we use a decision-making framework to work out what our next best action is, what a proportional next action is. And the same goes for an organization in that front as it does for the individual. It's just that AI right now is forcing us to think about those things a little bit more clearly and presently, I think.
What's fascinating to me is that you mentioned that there were these 4 principles: transparency, accountability, privacy, and bias. Organizations are going to have to think through, given the new governance systems. So what's to stop organizations, for example, deciding, we've found this new system, we're going to be able to let go 75% of our workforce and we're going to create tremendous shareholder value? It sounded to me like the governance in place doesn't really cover that particular scenario.
It's important to remember in situations like this that existing law applies. Just because there's a new technology on the block, or there's a new way of working, or there's a new cultural phenomenon, doesn't change the fact that there are controls and laws and regulations and policies and principles that pre-exist that technology that are applicable in this circumstance. And so just because AI can replace your workforce doesn't mean that the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations isn't going to be down your neck if you sack your whole workforce, you know? So I think that's an extreme scenario, obviously, but not one that isn't already playing out. And you can just look over the Pacific at Silicon Valley, who, you know, those organizations are laying off people in the tens and hundreds of thousands over the last kind of 12 to 18 months. And disproportionately, they're affecting the likes of salespeople, marketing people, junior software engineers. They're even trimming their engineering teams because ostensibly AI is not bad enough at coding that we can't get some optimization in our workforce makeup. So I think that what we'll find is that, yes, there are a lot of retrenchments and organizational restructures to kind of optimize in response, but it would be remiss of anybody to forget that existing laws apply in this circumstance, and the government is very interested in how the economy is going to change as a result of the adoption of AI, and they're acting accordingly already.
Well, thank you very much, James Gauci. Really appreciate you joining us today.
That's my pleasure, Gavin. Really enjoyed it.